should have their push-to-talk turned on in their mumble settings, or they should mute themselves. It's probably better if you have push-to-talk turned on, because if you need to ask a question after the class is done, you might not realize that you're muted. After the class ends, we'll open up comms and we'll have a quick Q&A session or a long Q&A session, depending on how many people have questions. If you do have questions during the class, we'll use the class.E-UNI channel to keep Mumble clear. I will be watching the channel, and if you ask a question, I'll try my best to get to it. If longer topics come up that may need some time to discuss, I have reserved some time at the end, and we'll cover larger topics then if that's the appropriate place to do it. I got my linking volunteer, I got my recording volunteer. So in this class, we're going to be covering all about Gunnery, from the basics of what it is and how it works, to the attributes that affect it, all the way into the slightly more advanced topics like how the two-hit equation works and how that affects, and how that's affected by all the various factors. So as I warned in the forum post, there will be some light math involved, but hopefully it won't be too heavy. Or at least not too heavy for this class. I did post a forum link on the calendar event, and as we go through the class, I'd like people to kind of keep in the back of their mind what they liked, what they didn't like, how good of a job they think I'm doing, etc., etc. And if you have feedback on any of that, I would very much appreciate if after class was over, you posted your thoughts on that forum thread so that future generations of Unistas who get the same class can get an ever more improved version of the same class. So again, please feel free to share any of those comments in any mechanism you choose, but with the forum thread being the preferred mechanism. I will post the link at the end of the class just as a reminder. Okay, let's get started. So Gunnery, what is it? Basically, Gunnery consists of all of the weapons and skills and modules associated with weapons that turn. There are some weapons that turn and even there are others that don't. All the ones that turn are the ones that we care about. Those are the Gunnery weapons. Gunnery weapons fire either projectiles or lasers, and they use either ammunition or crystals. So either require that you go into them, they have a limited supply of ammo, after which they need to be reloaded, or they have crystals which don't need to be reloaded, but which in certain cases degrade over time and need to be replaced. In other cases, they remain indefinitely. So advantages, why would you want to use guns as opposed to some other weapon like missiles or smart bombs or ECM breakers and so forth? The main advantage of compared to other kinds of damage you can deal in EVE is that it's instantaneous. You don't have to wait for, say, a missile to travel from you to the target, by which time they may have jumped through a gate or docked in a station, etc., etc. Gunnery has none of that. You deal with damage right away. As soon as you activate that module, the bullet has arrived at the target. So here we'll hand wave over how that couldn't possibly be true in real life, but for more or less, in EVE's case, it's instantaneous. Gunnery has diverse kinds of damage. It's the only sort of weapon that can deal multiple kinds of damage simultaneously, at least at a T1 level. And it's also got I'm sorry, just people are having trouble hearing me?
Yeah, there's just some feedback from your mic.
Let me try something. Testing 1, 2, 3. Are people still getting feedback?
A little bit.
Okay, I apologize
but it's
for
better,
that.
I think.
Okay, I apologize for that. Well, hopefully it'll improve somewhat. Okay, so like I said, there are sort of diverse strengths to Gunnery 2. They can deal multiple kinds of damage, and they are not susceptible to some of the other weaknesses that, like very limited range that, say, smart bombs have, or the single damage type that missiles deal, and so forth. Gunnery also has a lot of different ways to specialize. There's routes to specializing deeply in one particular kind and size of gun. There's a lot of ways to enrich your particular kind of damage output. So, for example, unlike missiles, which pretty much only have one module that you can bit to improve your missile DPS, Gunnery has a number of different kinds. There are tracking enhancers and gyro stabilizers, and there's a damage output module for each individual kind of gun, and so on. And more importantly, guns are pretty cheap. Unlike certain other kinds of weapons, generally guns will be the cheapest kind of weapon that you can fit for a given size. But it's not all roses and sunshine. There are some disadvantages to gunnery as well. In particular, guns also have a few vulnerabilities. Missiles, for example, do have a one-up on guns in that they're not susceptible to some of the same evasion tactics that guns are. So missiles, for instance, cannot be out-tracked. You can't defeat a missile by moving quickly around a target, whereas you can very easily defeat a slow turret by doing just that. Gunnery also tends to require more skills relative to the same size for a given module. So, for example, to get to medium guns requires that you train more skills than training the medium missile skills. Usually, you have to train all of the previous skill levels and then some, whereas say with missiles you don't have to do any of that. With smart bombs there's considerably fewer requirements, etc. So gunnery weapons do require more skill than other kinds of weapons, especially to max out your DPS on them. There are a lot of different ways to mitigate damage from guns. You can increase your angular velocity around a target. You can try to have a smaller signature radius. You can try to evade damage by flying further away, etc., etc. There's a lot of different ways to defeat gunnery, both on a tactical level and on a sort of mathematical level. It's also not very surprising when people fit guns. Generally speaking, most ships in EVE will be fitting a gun unless they're specifically a missile boat or they're otherwise specially fitted to take advantage of their ship's roll bonuses. So, for example, maybe a ship might be fitted with neutralizers, but that's probably because it has neutralizer bonuses. However, if you look at most ships that are designed to be used in combat, they, generally speaking, have a gun bonus of some kind. And unlike some other types of weapons, it's a little harder to change your mind about what kind of damage you want to deal with guns. There are a couple of exceptions, but generally speaking, given a particular category of gun, that is energy turrets, hybrid turrets, or projectile turrets, you're going to be dealing types of damage that are constrained to only the types that can be dealt with that turret. Okay, so you're excited about guns, you want to start using them. What do you need? First, you need to retrain the skill Gunnery 1, or rather Gunnery 2 level 1. So if someone could link the Gunnery skill, that would be excellent. Then you need to have trained the turret skill that you want to use. So, for example, if you want to use medium hybrid turrets, then you need to have medium hybrid turrets trained to level 1. Or if you wanted to use small projectile turrets, then you need small projectile turrets trained to level 1. And someone could link, say, large projectile turrets, that skill. I'll illustrate what I meant about the gunnery skills being a little bit more intense. You also need a ship with greater than one or more turret hardpoints. So if everyone would hit Alt-F now and take a look at their ship's fitting, you'll notice that your ship will have 0 or more circles on the upper left portion underneath the turret icon. That turret icon circles tells you how many turret hardpoints you have. For each filled circle, that is a turret hardpoint that is being occupied. For each unfilled circle, that is a turret hardpoint that's being unoccupied. Generally speaking, if you have a gun bonus to your ship, you want to see all of those circles full, unless you know what you're doing and you're using some particularly creative fit. So if people would take a look at Laurent Hemensay's link there for large projectile turret, you'll see that if you go to the prerequisites tab, you'll see that large projectile turrets require that you have trained not just small projectile turrets, but also medium projectile turrets. And in this case, you also have to have gunnery to level 5 to use to use large projectile turrets. But if you compare that to, say, I don't know, cruise missiles. Someone could link the cruise missile skill. That's not important, but we'll just keep going. I just wanted to illustrate that the overall level of skill points is lower for the same size weapons in guns for missiles than it is for guns. So yeah, you need to have a turret hardpoint so you can fit the gun, and of course your module has to be online. You can activate offline modules. And then your gun module has to be loaded with crystals or ammo. It's crystals if you're using an energy turret, and it's ammo if you're it's crystal if you're using an energy turret, and ammo if you're using a hybrid or projectile turret. So if you take a look at your fitting window again and you have a gun fitted, you will see 4 bars at the top of each slice that's occupied by a particular gun. Those 4 bars correspond to your ammo being 25, 50, 75, or 100% full for that gun. That tells you if you, for example, need to load more ammo into the gun. So if you've got all of those things, then congratulations, you are able to undock and shoot things. So how does actually shooting things work? First, you lock something up, then you shoot at it, and then, as we said before, your target will instantly take damage. Maybe. How do we know if it'll take damage or not? How do we know how much damage it will take? Well, that's what we're going to talk about next. So just shooting a gun doesn't actually guarantee that you're going to be effective at shooting it. So what are some of the attributes that affect how you're actually going to be able to deal damage to valid targets? So we'll review each of the attributes now, and we'll go into each of them in more depth after this. So first we have tracking speed. This is how quickly your turret can rotate to follow a particular target. We've got angular velocity, which is how quickly the target is making circles around you. We've got signature radius, which is how big your ship appears to guns that are shooting at you. We've got signature resolution, which is a measure of how granular a target the gun can hit. We've got optimal range, which is the range which your guns don't get any accuracy penalty. And we have bluff range, which is the where your guns take a 50% accuracy penalty. So, wow, that was a bit of an info dump. Let's talk about each of those in more detail, and hopefully it'll make sense when it all comes together. Let's talk about the first two, tracking speed and angular velocity, because they're both related. In fact, each pair of these items is related, so tracking speed, angular velocity are related, signature radius, signature resolution are related, and optimal and fall off are closely related. So to understand what we mean by tracking speed and angular velocity, it helps to imagine your ship and then something orbiting your ship and doing so in a perfect circle. So imagine that the black triangle is your ship, and the red triangle is another ship that's orbiting you. And it is making a perfect circle around you. Now suppose that it's not just sitting there, it's moving around the circle. And imagine that it traverses a distance along the circle equal to the radius of the circle. So imagine that your ship is watching that ship rotate around you, and if it, for example, rotated a quarter of the way around the circle, we would say that it rotated 90 degrees. If it rotated a third of the way around the circle, then that would be 120 degrees, and so on. But if it rotated a distance such that it followed that ship a length of one radius of the circle along the outside of the circle, that turns out to be a very special angle. We call that angle 1 radian. So if it's about 60 degrees, a radian is about 57 degrees, but just about 60 degrees. And a radian, again, is equal to the angle that your ship would turn to sweep out a distance of 1 radius of the circle along the circle's edge. Notice that radians are a measure of angle, not of distance. So you can see that the angle in the green circle, even though it's a bigger circle, is 1 radian, as is the angle in the blue circle. They're totally different circles, but they're measuring exactly the same angle swept out by that white sector. It turns out that if an object orbits you completely, then it has done 1 full circle around you, and 1 full circle is equal to 2 times pi radians, or about 6.3 radians. The reason that's important is because in EVE, we measure tracking speed in radians per second. So your angular velocity, the speed at which one ship is orbiting another, is measured in units of radians per second. So 2 pi radians per second would be 1 full circle every second. About, if you did 1 radian per second, that would be about 1/6 of a circle per second, and so on. So in this example, that ship had 1 radian per second. So your gun's tracking speed measures how quickly it can turn to follow targets that are trying to move around you. Most of the time, unless you're very lucky, targets in EVE will not be sitting still, so this is relevant for almost every single encounter you can imagine. So your turrets need to turn at least as fast as the target's angular velocity to be able to track it. So if the target's angular velocity is 1 radian per second, and your gun's tracking speed is 1.2 radians per second, then you're getting pretty close to, the target is getting pretty close to your tracking speed, and you're not going to get much. You're going to start taking a significant accuracy penalty. You want their angular velocity to be as close to 0 as possible to minimize the penalty that you will take. The larger their angular velocity as a fraction of your tracking speed, the worse off you are. If someone could please link any gun at all, you can just drag a module in, say, from your fitting window into the class.E-UNI chat. That would be perfectly fine. Okay, let's start with the 200 millimeter autocannon one. I want everyone to click on the 200 millimeter autocannon one that Candide Maudalier so kindly posted. And then I want you to go to the Attributes tab of that gun. So go find the entry for tracking speed, and you'll notice that indeed tracking speed is measured in, you guessed it, radians per second. So in this case, we have a tracking speed for this gun of about 0.3 radians per second. So a target that was going that speed would be making a full circle around you about once every 20 seconds or so. So that's about 5% of the way around a circle. So it turns out that you can see what the angular velocity of different targets is. If you set up your overview and you go to we won't be covering this, but if you set up your overview later yourself and you look at the columns that you can set, one of the columns that you can set is indeed angular velocity. So what you'll be able to do is assess whether the angular velocity of targets that you're trying to hit is too high or too low for the guns that you want to use them on. Generally speaking, again, the higher the target's angular velocity as a proportion of your tracking speed, the worse your attempts to shoot them will be. And we'll talk about exactly how much worse they will be when we get to the two-hit portion of a class. So for now, you just have to remember that the larger the angular velocity as a fraction of the tracking speed, the worse off you are. So again, if your gun can't turn quickly enough to hit the target, it won't be able to hit it as well. So on the left, if you imagine that your tracking speed over 1 second is equal to the red shaded region, then you will not be able to accurately hit the target that is represented by if the target's angular velocity is the distance that they're traveling around the circle is measured there, and your turret's tracking speed is the red sector, then you're not going to be able to do a good job of hitting them because you are doing considerably less than their angular velocity in terms of tracking speed. On the other hand, if you look at the right-hand side, if your turret's tracking speed is significantly more than their particular angular velocity, then you're going to be doing quite a bit better. Ideally, you'd like to see, again, their angular velocity be as close to 0 as possible, but every little bit counts. One thing to notice is that if a target is orbiting at a particular speed, it becomes harder to hit when it is closer. That is, its angular velocity increases at the same regular velocity. So if you imagine that target going around you again, and you imagine that target moving the same speed but in a smaller circle, then they will have a higher angular velocity on the right than on the left. So in both cases, the target is traversing the same actual distance because they have the same velocity, but on the right-hand case, they're moving more of the way around the circle because they have a shorter distance to make the same distance around that circle. So that has implications for angular velocity. It means that if somebody's orbiting you really tightly and closely, they're going to have a pretty easy time avoiding your guns if they're not able to keep up. So in this example, if the target's tracking speed was about, if the target speed was about 1,000 meters per second, then this would be the approximate distance. You can see that the orbit distance decreasing by a third from 3,000 meters on the left to 2,000 meters on the right produces about a 50% increase in their angular velocity. So the tighter you orbit, the more quickly you'll be able to orbit. The higher your angular velocity will be around that target. So again, if your tracking speed was, say, 1.2 radians per second on the left, that would be enough to hit the target. But if they orbit a little bit closer, you will start taking substantial accuracy penalties. Okay, so that's it for tracking speed and angular velocity. Let's move on to the next pair, signature radius and signature resolution. So again, signature radius measures your electronic footprint, how big your ship appears to electronic systems and weapons and so forth. Signature resolution measures the degree to which your turrets can lock on to targets of a given signature radius. So if we take a look at the 200 millimeter Autocannon 1, that that Candide Modalier posted before. And again, if you go to the Attributes tab, you'll see that that gun's signature resolution is 40 meters. It turns out that all guns of the same size have the same signature resolution. So in other words, all small guns, no matter what they are, have a signature resolution of 40 meters. So again, signature radius. The signature radius measures how easy your ship is to lock onto and detect. For most frigates, you're going to see signature radii around the 30-40 meter range. Generally, the weaker the ship, the smaller its signature radius will be, and the harder it will be to hit. So, for example, here are some frigates, and here's a destroyer. So you can see that the Claw, which is someone could link the Claw and the Wolf and the Catalyst. Thank you. So you can see that the Claw, which is an interceptor of the Millimeter race, is it's got a very teensy signature radius because interceptors are tiny, fast, and very fragile. And if you compare that to the Wolf, which is one of the Millimeter assault frigates, you'll see that it gets a small signature radius, so it's equally difficult. It's about as difficult to hit as a interceptor. And here you'll see that that's a substantially larger signature radius, so it's much easier to hit relative to a frigate. It's almost twice as easy to hit. So again, signature radius measures sort of the difference, the degree to which a ship is easy to lock onto and interact with. As you keep moving up through the ship classes, you'll see the signature radius increase substantially. So we saw that frigates are about within the 40 meter range. Cruisers are in about the 150 meter range. And as you start getting bigger and bigger into battleships, you're seeing 400 meters. Carriers and other capital ships are even larger. As we saw before with the 200 millimeter gun that was linked, each turret also sees the world with a certain level of granularity, and that's what we mean by signature resolution. The fuzzier the world looks to the target, to the turret, then the harder it is for it to see things. So small turrets have a very fine signature resolution. They have a 40 meter signature resolution. Medium turrets have a 125 meter signature resolution. And then large turrets have a 400 meter signature resolution. The way that guns work is that they compare the signature resolution to the signature radius of the thing that they are trying to hit. It works just like the tracking speed and angular velocity does. The bigger the ratio between the signature, the bigger the ratio between the signature resolution and signature radius, the worse off the gun will be. So if the signature radius is very small and the signature resolution is very big, that's a very high ratio, and so you will take a substantial accuracy penalty. If the signature resolution is very big, if the signature resolution is very small and the signature radius is very big, then you will take much less of an accuracy penalty. You'll always take a little bit of an accuracy penalty. You'll always take a little bit of an accuracy penalty, but again, the smaller that ratio, the better. So if you keep the signature radius of a ship, if you imagine keeping the signature radius constant and increasing the signature resolution, that makes a given signature radius harder to hit. So, for example, frigates are a 40 meter signature radius and small size guns are about a 40 meter signature resolution. So if you tried hitting a frigate with a small size gun, you're not really going to take too much of a penalty or get too much of a bonus. If you try hitting that same frigate with medium-sized guns, you're going to take a substantial penalty to being able to hit them. And if you try hitting them with battleship-sized guns, large guns, you're going to have a real tough time hitting that frigate. Conversely, if you imagine keeping the same size gun and trying to shoot targets of different sizes, the bigger the signature radius of the thing you're trying to hit, the better. So if you're trying to shoot large guns against small ships, that's no good. If you're trying to shoot large guns against medium-sized ships, that's a little better. And if you're trying to shoot large guns against large ships, that's the best. Generally speaking, guns in EVE are balanced by having more powerful guns have worse tracking speeds and higher signature resolution, but much better DPS. So in other words, they become worse at hitting things that are smaller and faster than them, but they deal more damage, so that sort of counterbalances them against ships of their own size, which tend to be equally kind of slower and more ponderous. So we talked about the first two pairs of attributes. Let's talk about the last two, optimal range and fall-off range. Again, as we said before, optimal range, each gun has an optimal range, and that's the range at which that gun takes no accuracy penalty. And then the fall-off range is the distance past your optimal, where your guns have a 50% accuracy penalty. So you can shoot guns at any range up to your targeting range, but the farther away your target, generally speaking, the less accurate your guns will be. Your gun's optimal range measures where it takes no accuracy penalty at all from range. So if you imagine that this distance on the screen represents your optimal range, then you would not take any accuracy penalty inside of that range. If you're shooting at a target inside of that range, you will not take an accuracy penalty due to range inside that range. Your gun's fall-off range is the additional range past your optimal where it takes a 50% accuracy penalty. So, for example, if your optimal were 1,000 meters and your fall-off were 6,000 meters, then that means that within 1,000 meters you will take no range accuracy penalty from shooting things, and then between 1,000 and 7,000 meters, you will take somewhere between 0 and a 50% accuracy penalty due to range, depending on the precise range. It's a graduated sloping scale. And then at twice the fall-off range past your optimal, your gun's accuracy becomes more or less negligible. So you can see here that your best shot of trying to hit somebody is within optimal, where you take no accuracy penalty. But if you must shoot someone, then within one fall-off is certainly better than nothing at all. But then within 1 and 2 fall-offs, well, not shooting them because you're hopefully just wasting ammo at that point. So if everyone could go to the 200 millimeter link that, actually someone posted a different gun just so we're not using it. If someone link any gun at all, it doesn't matter which one, we'll use that one. Okay, so let's all look at the dual afocal pulse maser that Laurent Hemensay posted. And then let's take a look at the attributes tab there. And let's use what we learned before to assess how well this gun would fare in a variety of combat situations. So first we can see that its tracking speed is about 0.27, which is relatively snappy for a small size gun, although it's somewhere in the medium-high range. You can see that it has a optimal range of 47.25 meters, but a fall off of 1,500. So its optimal range is about 5,000 meters, and its fall off is about 1,500 meters. So it has a medium size-ish optimal range in which it takes no penalty, but it very quickly becomes useless outside of that range. So if that target is even 2 kilometers away from the edge of your optimal, you will not be able to shoot them very effectively. It should be noted, of course, that we'll get to this later, but this is an energy turret, and as such, it can be fitted with frequency crystals, which are able to modify characteristics of the gun. We'll talk about how you can sort of customize your gun by fitting different types of ammo and frequency crystals. In this particular case, frequency crystals will augment or they'll either improve or decrease the range at which your gun operates in favor of trading off capacitor usage and damage. That is to say, frequency crystals that are geared towards smaller ranges, or they're geared towards the extreme end of your ranges, will give you less capacitor usage and worse damage, and the ones that are for close-up shooting will give you more damage. So to summarize what we learned from the attributes, you want to keep your, if you're shooting at someone, you want to try to keep their angular velocity low and your tracking speed high. If you're shooting at someone, you want to keep their signature radius high and your signature resolution low. And you want that target to stay within optimal plus fall-off range. So that's if you're shooting at someone. If you don't want to get shot, then you just reverse all of these. So if you want to avoid damage from a gun, you should keep your signature radius low and try to go up against ships that have guns fitted that are high signature resolution. If you want to avoid damage, you should try to keep your angular velocity as high as possible, and you should try to go up against turrets that have a poor tracking speed. So, for example, if you saw that someone was fitted with artillery, which is the projectile variant that is that favors range. We'll talk about that in a second, but basically each type of turret has both a range variant and a power variant. So the range variant shoots things that are farther away at the cost of lower damage. The power variant shoots the things that are closer so it shoots things that are closer with higher damage, but it has a small range. So if you were going up against a artillery fit ship, then it would make a lot of sense to try to orbit them very closely and shoot at them because they will not be able to shoot you back effectively. Okay, so we talked about how guns in general work and what factors influence them. Now let's talk about the specific kinds of guns you're able to fit in EVE. So there are 3 big kinds of turrets in EVE. We've got hybrid turrets, which use hybrid charges. You've got energy turrets, which use frequency crystals. And you've got projectile turrets, which use projectile ammo. The words that are in capital letters there, hybrid charges, frequency crystals, and projectile ammo, refer to the market categories of each of the ammunition types for those weapons. So if you open up your market tab and you look under ammunition and charges, you'll see that under ammunition and charges you see frequency crystals, hybrid charges, and projectile ammo. That is where all of the ammo for these 3 weapon types can be found. So like I alluded to before, each of the turret kinds is then split into 2 variants, one for range and one for power. The range variant, and generally speaking, has lower tracking speeds the power variant rather has, I'll show them both. The power variant has smaller optimal and fall-off ranges, so they have worse range. They generally have better damage and tracking. Of course, they'll have higher tracking so that they can accommodate people who are up close to them since they have that smaller range. And they also chew through ammo faster. So part of their overall DPS comes from the fact that they're shooting faster and not just dealing more damage. By contrast, range variants have much larger optimal and fall-off ranges. They have lower DPS. They also have slower tracking, and they don't shoot quite as frequently. Each of the variants has a special name under that particular turret kind. So the power variant of hybrid turrets is called blasters. The range variant of hybrid turrets is called railguns. The power variant of energy turrets is called pulse lasers, and the range variant of energy turrets is called beam lasers. Again, the power variant of projectiles is called autocannons, and the range variant of projectile turrets are called artillery. If someone could link, never mind, we won't go through all that. If someone could link just, let's say, a blaster, and if someone else could link a beam laser. Or the same person, it doesn't matter. Okay, so Lawrence Hemensay linked an example of a blaster. So notice that if you go to the Attributes tab, this is it's going to be a little tough to compare these because they're different sizes. Actually, no, we're not. Is also a medium. Okay, so yeah, I see this will do just fine. So look at the regulated electron phase cannon 1 that Lauren linked, and go to the Attributes tab, and notice that the optimal range on this, which is a medium-sized weapon, is about 2,100 meters, which is fair to say reasonably terrible for a cruiser-sized weapon. That means that cruiser has to get real close up to do serious damage. And now compare that to the quad, and then also notice, by the way, that it has a, actually no, we'll come back to that later. So yeah, the optimal range, 2,100 meters. Now compare that to the quad light beam laser that Lauren Hemensay linked. And notice that its optimal range is about 4 times as large. The 8,000 meters there, but again, as is characteristic of energy turrets, it has a very rapid fall-off, so it's great up to 8,000 meters and then more or less useless at 10,000 meters. So it's got a wide range, that it's got a large optimal, which means it's really good up until that range, and then it is very quickly useless outside of that range. Now, if someone could link, say, any artillery weapon, please. Okay, perfect. So again, another medium-sized weapon. This is a 720 millimeter carbine howitzer. Take a look at that optimal range. It's got 21 kilometer optimal range. So a very nice optimal range, and it's also got a fall-off that's almost as big as its optimal range. So this gun is not only good to a significant distance, it's also very good far past that distance. But notice that its tracking speed is way lower than the other two ones we saw before. Its tracking speed here is 0.02 radians per second. If you compare that to the quad light beam laser that we saw before, which had a tracking speed of 0.08, so it's about 4 times worse tracking speed, but about 3 times better optimal range and significantly better first fall-off range. So it's it projects its damage very well over a large range of different possible engagement ranges. So that's sort of the characteristic of each of those types of turrets. You'll see energy turrets have ranges that are good optimals, but then fall off very, very quickly outside of that. You'll see projectile turrets with weakish optimals, but very strong fall-off ranges. And in other words, they project their damage well over a variety of ranges. Energy weapons project their damage they project their damage perfectly over a medium-ish range. I mean, they're completely useless outside of that range. And then hybrid turrets, as the name suggests, are somewhere in the middle. So, features of hybrid turrets. So these are sort of what I'm going to call the extreme turret flavor. They deal only kinetic and thermal damage. They're both the best at both of their turrets. The power variant does the most damage out of any of the turrets, and the range variant has the longest range out of any of the turrets. But the range variant also has the worst damage out of any of the turrets, and the highest damage, and the power variant also has the worst range out of any of the turrets. So that's what I mean by the extremes. They're sort of the extreme ends of the spectrum. The power variant is the most powerful one, and the range variant is the farthest shooting one. So that means that hybrid turrets are vulnerable to enemies. They can dictate the range of an engagement, particular range, or they can only project their DPS over a small window in the case of the power variants. Turrets take hybrid charges, as we discussed before. Hybrid charges have the characteristic that they take a 5-second reload time, and all of the different charges that you could pick trade their damage for range or capacitor bonuses. So it takes capacitor to shoot a hybrid turret, and by swapping out different kinds of hybrid turret ammo, you're making a decision about whether you want to favor DPS or favor range or capacitor. So, for example, if someone could link Iron S, which is the extreme range variant of the hybrid turret ammo. Thank you very much. So take a look at the Iron Charge S, and then compare it to if someone could link the Antimatter S, which is the extreme power variant of the hybrid ammo. So you can see that the Iron Charged S has does 3 kinetic damage and 2 thermal damage, and it's got a 60% range bonus. Now compare that to the Antimatter Charge S, which has a negative 50% range bonus, but does 12 damage total, 7 kinetic and 5 thermal. So in other words, it does almost twice as much damage and then some. And then there are a number of other charges in between that are basically trading off at different ratios. Oh, also, this isn't, actually, never mind, I'll come back to that. Okay, so moving on from hybrid turrets, next up we have energy turrets. These are the sort of medium-flavored turret. They only deal electromagnetic or thermal damage, so that's compared to hybrid turrets, which deal kinetic and thermal damage. Energy turrets are kind of in between the other two. They're best for mid-range engagements. Their power variant has a medium range for power variants, and it also has a medium DPS. And their range variant has a medium range compared to the other two, and it also has a medium DPS compared to the other two. You trade that sort of mid-range flexibility for much higher capacitor usage. Energy turrets have about double the capacitor usage of other kinds of hybrid turrets, rather. So energy turrets are generally what's favored by AMAR ships, which is unfortunate because AMAR ships generally have worse capacitor relative to other kinds of ships. So you're going to need to train your energy management and engineering skills up high to be able to use energy turrets effectively without capping out. Energy turrets, however, do have the distinct advantage that you never need to reload them. They only take frequency crystals, which are an infinite charge item, essentially. They never, frequency crystals never run out, but they do degrade if you're using the Tech 2 variants of frequency crystals. They take damage very, very slowly, though, so your Tech 2 crystal will last a time, but it nevertheless will one day break. One of the best advantages of frequency crystals is that there is no reload time on them. So unlike projectile and hybrid turrets, you can instantly switch the kind of crystal you have loaded in your energy turret. That's very nice because it means that you can decide to the state of an engagement changes or you want to switch up strategies, your gun can change to match that strategy. I would say that that's a fairly advanced tactic, though, because you need to have pretty high situational awareness of what's going on to be able to make that decision quickly and in real time. But nevertheless, it is an option that's available for you. Then finally, we have projectile turrets, which are which I'm calling the flexible turret flavor. They deal any kind of damage. So unlike the other two, hybrid, which can only deal kinetic and thermal, and energy, which deals EM and thermal, projectiles can deal any kind of damage. And the way that you get that damage is by substituting the correct ammunition type. Projectile turrets get the best fall off out of any particular turret. So their power variant has the best fall off of all the power variants, and their range variant has the best fall off of all the range variants, and so on. But they're sort of in between on how their optimals look. So that means that they project, as the name might suggest, they project their damage over a significantly larger range, although they may not project it at 100% the way that energy turrets do, for example. But they have the very distinct advantage that they don't require any capacitor usage. So you can shoot your projectile turrets all day long, and your capacitor will not drop by a single bar. They trade their ammo flexibility, however, for you sacrifice the ability to change ammo effectively during the middle of a fight because projectile ammo has a 10-second reload time. Generally speaking, unlike the other two kinds, hybrid turrets, which have a smooth range from iron to antimatter, and then energy turrets have the frequency crystals that are also a smooth range from, I always forget what this is. I think it's from radio to multi-frequency is the high range, low DPS, and then multi-frequency is the low range, high DPS. So there's sort of a smooth transition there, but with projectile turrets, the ammo actually works a little bit differently. There's sort of three different brackets of ammo. The first bracket has very high range and slightly better tracking speed. So if someone could link, say, the nuclear S ammo. Thank you. So here's this is the first bracket. All the ammo within the same bracket, just different kinds of DPS. So if you look at the, let's say, Proton S ammo. Thank you. If you pair nuclear S to proton S, they're in the same bracket, so they give exactly the same range bonus and exactly the same tracking speed multiplier. But you take a look at their damage, they both deal 5 points of damage total, but they distribute the damage differently. This is the difference between, that's the main difference between items, ammo in the same projectile bracket. They have exactly the same range and tracking speed bonuses, but they have different damage distributions. So let's compare now depleted uranium, which is in the middle bracket, and then phased plasma, which is in the highest power bracket. Thank you very much. So start with Proton S, and you'll notice that the range bonus is 60% and the tracking speed is 1.05. So in other words, a 5% tracking speed bonus, and dealing 5 damage here. This is the high range, low damage bracket. Then you've got depleted uranium, which is sort of in the middle. Notice that we're dealing 3 different kinds of damage here with depleted uranium. We've got explosive, kinetic, and thermal. So you've got 8 damage in this case, so we're about 40% better DPS than, or about 40% better DPS than the Proton S does. But notice that the range bonus has gone away and the tracking speed bonus has gone up. And then finally, go to the phased plasma S. Notice that now the DPS has gone way up, but the range has gone way down, and there's no tracking speed multiplier at all. So again, the projectile turret ammo is arranged a little bit differently than the hybrid and energy turret ammo is. Those guys are more of a spectrum from low DPS, high range, to high DPS, low range, and then projectile turrets have 3 brackets that are identical to each other except for the distribution of damage. Okay, so next let's talk about some of the modules that you can fit to improve your gunnery DPS. Each of the, there are 3 kinds of turrets. There's energy, projectile, and hybrid, and each of them has a specially named module for rate of fire and damage improvement. That's called the gyro stabilizer for projectile weapons, if someone could link that. It's the heat sink for energy weapons, and it's the magnetic field stabilizer for hybrid weapons. All of these guys are require the weapon upgrade skill, which is very, very much worth training because not only does it let you use these improvements, it also makes it easier to fit guns by reducing the amount of CPU you need to shoot the guns. And once you start getting into bigger ships or fitting more powerful guns, they really start chewing up your CPU. So it's important to be able to squeeze that last little bit out, and weapon upgrades are a great way to reduce that. So, for example, they're really important on destroyers, which have a lot of high slots, and you're going to be chewing up a lot of your CPU trying to fit all those guns. The next way you can improve guns is with tracking enhancers, if someone could link a tracking enhancer. And then if someone could also link a tracking computer so we can compare the two. So a few differences here. The tracking enhancer and tracking computer, everyone look at the attributes tab of both. So you can see that the tracking enhancer gives you a tracking speed bonus, a fall-off bonus, and an optimal range bonus. I mean, the tracking computer gives you a tracking speed bonus, a fall-off bonus, and an optimal range bonus. So they're about the same thing. One's a low slot module. The tracking enhancer is a low slot module, and the tracking computer is a mid slot module. So why is that the only difference? Is that the only reason you'd use one or the other? Well, not exactly. Tracking computers will use up capacitor space, and because they're an active module, so you have to turn on a tracking computer And you can see here that it consumes 7 gigajoules of power every 10 seconds. So that's a little bit of a drain on your cap. But more importantly, though, tracking computers give better base tracking bonuses and worse base range bonuses. So a tracking computer that's scripted, you can put scripts inside tracking computers. Scripts are a special kind of item. Someone could link an example of the script, say the optimal range tracking script. Basically, putting these scripts inside your tracking computer will double its bonus for one of the bonuses and reduce to 0 one of the other bonuses. So you can see the optimal range bonus doubles your optimal range bonus for a tracking computer, and it reduces to 0 your tracking speed. So it's a nice way to trade off. For example, if you want to turn your slow-moving artillery that's probably only going to be shooting things at far ranges anyway into an even better version of the same thing, then you might want to fit the tracking computer with an optimal range script so that you can really extend that range. So basically, if you want pure tracking, it's better to fit the tracking computer with a script. If you want pure range, then it's better to go with the tracking enhancer. Some other things that I'll just cover briefly. Target painters are very nice because they increase the signature radius of the thing that you're trying to hit. Someone could link a target painter, please. The target painter is very nice because it will add a signature radius bloom to the thing, will light them up like the broadside of a barn and make them much easier to hit. And it doesn't just make it much easier to hit for you, it makes it much easier to hit for everyone. So if multiple people are trying to shoot that target, you will drastically increase the DPS that you're pouring onto that target. Stasis webifiers, someone could link that. Stasis webs will slow down the target you're trying to shoot. They also, as a consequence, lower the angular velocity of the target, so they'll either have to orbit much closer to you to get the same angular velocity, in which case they might be coming in range of your very, very tasty guns, or they'll just slow down and stay at the same range, which is even better because now you can block them and they can't really escape you. And then finally, some things you may not be fitting unless you're more of an experienced player, but there are tracking links. These are special kinds of links that will help you track. These are warfare links that will help you make other ships, they'll help you pass bonuses to other ships that make them have better tracking speeds and so on. So there are some Millimeter ships that get tracking link bonuses, and some of the Mars ships get tracking disruptor bonuses, which are also helpful. Tracking disruptors are kind of module. They reduce they're an E-war module that makes it harder for another ship's turrets to turn. It reduces their tracking speed. Okay, Gunnery Skills. So the major important Gunnery skills to care about are actually not in the Gunnery block at all. There are some Gunnery skills that are important inside the Gunnery block, of course, but the most important Gunnery skills you should have that are outside of Gunnery are long-range targeting. Someone could link that. Long-range targeting is spectacular because this makes your optimals, this makes your targeting range farther, so if you're trying to snipe people, now you have a much larger range to work with. Signature analysis, very excellent for improving your scan resolution, which doesn't help for shooting things, but helps for locking them up quicker, which means that you can apply your DPS sooner, and it counters range dictating enemies. So excellent for many reasons, but in particular for guns as well. Next, you've got energy systems operation and energy management. These are super, super important for the energy and hybrid turret folks because these will make more capacitor available to them. And you need a lot of capacitor to operate energy and hybrid turrets effectively, especially for energy turrets. You've got, if you're an energy turret pilot, which probably means you're a MAR, then you care about energy grid upgrades. You care about energy grid upgrades because level 5 of energy grid upgrades lets you fit reactor control unit 2s. These are important in general for certain kinds of MR ship fits because they improve the amount of power you've got going on. And then finally, you've got engineering and electronics. Both of engineering improves your total power grid, which is important because guns use up a lot of power, and electronics, which improves your CPU, is important because, well, you care about those for general reasons, not just because of guns. You should have those trained to 5 anyway, but energy and electronics are great for making you fit better guns, especially because the Tech 2 variants of guns they're much more of an energy, much more of a CPU their guns are. Okay, on to the gunnery skills themselves. So gunnery itself is important. You need gunnery to be able to actually shoot, actually be able to fit second-tier guns. So you need your Tech 2 guns. Then you need Gunnery 5. You also need it for tracking computers, I believe, if you want the Tech 2 tracking computer. Gunnery in general is just good, even if you're not trying to use Tech 2 guns, because you get 2% rate of fire bonus, I believe, for someone can link the Gunnery skill, 2% rate of fire bonus per level, and that's better than a 10% DPS bonus. Given the same percentage, you almost always want a rate of fire bonus instead of a DPS bonus because the same percentage rate of fire bonus is more than the corresponding DPS bonus. Gunnery 5, I'll come back to that later. So then we have, if you want to get into the Tech 2 guns, then you need Gunnery 5 plus one of the specific variant skills for each turret size. So for example, for energy turrets, there are pulse and beam specialization. So you got the pulse specialization for energy turrets, which lets you specialize in T2 guns for energy turrets, and the beam specialization, which lets you specialize on beam guns on energy turrets. Likewise, the same for the range and power variants of projectiles and hybrid turrets. So you need those skills if you want to use the Tech 2 guns for each particular turret kind. So that's just to fit the guns, but to actually improve your usage of the guns, there's a couple of other skills in gunnery to care about. First, and this one's kind of the odd man out, there's controlled bursts. Controlled bursts, that reduces the capacitor usage of your guns by 5% per level. So that's nice, that's especially nice for Amar and Galente pilots because they are classic hybrid and energy turret users. But note that this is more or less useless if you are a Millimeter pilot because you're probably flying with projectile weapons, and projectile weapons don't use capacitor at all, so this does not help you. That's why it's kind of the odd man out, because all of the others are improve every kind of turret. So probably I'll go in order of what I think is important. First, there's Sharpshooter, which gives you a 5% optimal range per level bonus. This is approximate order of importance, is not exact. You need this because Sharpshooter Sharpshooter turns all of your power variant guns and makes them slightly more range variant without giving up any power. So Sharpshooter is excellent because it lets you increase the range at which you can dictate engagements. Rapid firing, also super important, probably almost as important as which gun you choose, because 4% off of your firing time per level is about a 5% increase to your DPS per level. So another great way to increase your overall damage output. Keeping in mind, of course, that shooting more often means that you'll burn cap more often for hybrids and lasers. So that's definitely important to keep in mind too. Motion prediction, very important if you're using the range variants of guns, because motion prediction is going to help you track them much better. So again, motion prediction turns, just like Sharpshooter turns your power variant guns into a little bit of range variant, motion prediction turns your range variant guns into power variants by helping them track better. Then we've got Surgical Strike, which gives you 3% to damage per level. It's nice, but it's a rank 4 skill, which means that it takes 4 times as long to train each level than a rank 1 skill does. So this is probably one of the later skills you want to train in gunnery, especially considering that almost all ships that give you a damage miss base it off of the ship level that you're in. So for example, Millimeter frigates, a damage bonus, give you that Millimeter bonus based on the level of Millimeter frigate that you have. And since Millimeter frigate is a rank 2 skill instead of a rank 4 skill, you're probably better off training Millimeter frigate to 5 if you're flying frigates before you start training Surgical Strike at all. Because that will give you 5% bonus per level, whereas Surgical Strike only gives 3. Next up, you've got Trajectory Analysis. This needs Gunnery 4, but it's pretty excellent. This gives you, just like Sharpshooter added optimal range, Trajectory Analysis adds fall off. So this lets you project your guns across a wider range. Trajectory Analysis, not very useful for energy turrets, because they, again, have that sharp fall-off. So if you're an MR pilot using energy turrets, you probably don't care too much about trajectory analysis, although it helps a little bit. It's very important for people that are doing sniping. So if you're using artillery, you very much care about trajectory analysis. And then finally, the last two, weapon upgrades and advanced weapon upgrades. Weapon upgrades drops your CPU requirements, and then advanced weapon upgrades drops your power requirements. Advanced weapon upgrades is super important because when you start trying to build larger weapons, you really become constrained by your power grid, and so having advanced weapon upgrades is often a prerequisite of more difficult fits. A lot of times you'll see fits that absolutely require advanced weapon upgrades 4 and maybe even advanced weapon upgrades 5 for the really crazy stuff. Okay, so now, having seen all of that stuff, having gone through all of the shenanigans related to guns and seeing how the attributes affect each other and what kind of attributes they are and how they work, now we're going to try to bring it all together into the single equation that represents how your chance to hit in EVE is calculated. I'm going to caveat this by saying that this equation is empirically derived. That is, CCP has never confirmed or denied that this is the way that guns work. This is entirely a construction of the player base based on empirical data from watching people in different situations, different angular velocities, different signature radii, et cetera, watching them and gathering data from logs to see how all of that works. So this is not necessarily the way it works, but it's our best guess about how it does work. Okay, so that looks pretty tough. Let's talk about each of the pieces here. The P over here, that's your probability to hit. And it's multiplied by, it's equal to 0.5 raised to 2 different terms, the sum of these 2 different terms. And we call those 2 terms the tracking term and the range term. The tracking term says that you're tracking the degree to which, this measures the degree to which your signature radius, resolution, angular speed, and tracking speed affect each other. So you can see that why is Marius moving people out of the Mumble channel? Interesting. You can see that the tracking speed, that's this WT underneath there, and above that you can see the you can see. So let's go over each of the terms. So the WX, that is your turret's tracking speed. The WT is the target's angular velocity, which T is for target. That's multiplied by the ratio of the target's signature radius to, your signature resolution to the target signature radius. So the larger the target signature radius, the smaller this number is, the larger their angular velocity, the smaller this number is, and those two factors combined yield the same tracking term. The smaller that number is overall, the better it is for you. Because when we square that number, we get because this is 0.5 being raised to something, we want that something to be very, very small. If 0.5 is raised to a very, very small number, then we get a very, very large number. We get a number that's very close to 1. If 0.5 is raised to a very, very large number, then we get a number that's very, very close to 0, meaning we don't have a good chance to hit. So the smaller the tracking and range terms wind up being, the better it is for us. So the tracking term, the smaller that term is, the better. The smaller the range term is, the better. So the range term says you take a penalty equal to the bigger of either 0 or the difference between the target's range and the optimal range divided by the falloff. So, for example, if the target's range is 5,000 meters and your optimal range is 3,000 meters, then the maximum of 0 and 3,000 minus 5,000 is 0. But if the target's range were 10,000 meters and your optimal were 3,000 meters, then the maximum of 0 and 10 minus 3,000 is 7,000 meters. So that would be 7,000 on the top part of the range term. And then you would divide that by the falloff. So you can see that if you're within optimal range of a target, the numerator of that range term is 0. So it's as small as it can possibly be, which means you take no accuracy penalty from range, and that number is as small as it can be. Likewise, the tracking term is smallest when your tracking speed is very high, and the target's when your tracking speed is very high and the target's angular velocity is very low, and also when your signature resolution is very low and the target signature radius is very high. So that means that when all of those factors combine, you get a number that's a certain chance. You get a number between 0 and 1. What Eve does is it rolls an imaginary die, and that die has 1,000 faces on it, somewhere between 0.000 and 0.999. If the roll of the die is equal to or lower than your 2-hit chance, then you have struck the target. So, for example, if your chance to hit the target is 0.7, and Eve rolls the die and it comes up with 0.542, then you have hit the target because 0.542 is less than 0.7. So, wow, that was a lot. I did just want to show you guys that because that's just one way to kind of peel back the curtain and see what's going on and to see how all the math on that comes together. It's a little inscrutable because, you'll never no one in Eve ever busts out the 2-hit equation when they're trying to figure out how much damage they're going to do. I mean, they kind of just assess that based on their DPS and looking at the ammo they have bitted and so forth. But I did want to show you that just because there's a lot of this represents exactly how all of those factors come together. I think it's cool just to show people that it's not all smoke and mirrors, that there is some real stuff behind that. So that was to hit. What about damage? Well, it turns out damage is maybe even a little bit more complicated, and I'm not going to get into that for this particular class, but the short version is that damage is not actually a separate thing from your to-hit calculation. It's based entirely on your to-hit calculation. One thing I do want to mention briefly is that no matter how bad your chance to hit is, you always have a 1% chance to hit, and if you do hit in that best 1%, you get what's called a perfect damage. And if you deal perfect damage, you deal 300% of your base damage. So getting a perfect hit on somebody is like getting a critical hit. You might have heard the term in other kinds of games. So perfect damage is Eve's version of a critical hit, and you have a 1 in 100 chance to get perfect damage if you have a 100% hit chance. All right, so that wraps up the gunnery class. We are going to proceed now into the question and answer phase. And I'm going to just remind people, as I said at the beginning of the class, that it's important that I get your feedback about what you thought of the class and what you liked, what you didn't like, what you think I could do better, what you think I should spend more or less time on, etc., etc. Let me grab the forum link for you now. So there's the forum link after the class. If you wouldn't mind putting your thoughts down and letting me know whether you thought it was a good class, a bad class, somewhere in between, that would be excellent. So we'll now open Mumble up. We have open comms on Mumble. If you have a question, please go ahead and speak in Mumble, or if you don't have a mic, you can X up in class with your question, and I'll read it aloud for the sake of the recording, and then we can try to answer it for you. So go ahead, open floor.
Yeah, I have a question. How are the base shield and armor damage for certain ammo, is that related to the kinetic, thermal, and explosive damage at all, or is that a completely different attribute for the ammo?
It's those statistics are basically useless, and I would totally ignore them. All it's doing is adding up all of the damage that is dealt by that particular ammo, and then multiplying it by the generic T1 resistances for armor and shield. It's not a very helpful number because resistances are totally different between ships depending on what people have fitted. That's just sort of a guideline to help you gauge how much damage will be resisted by a given ammo. So if someone could link, say, any kind of projectile or hybrid turret ammo, please. Thanks, Lawrence. So everyone click on the Iron Charge S. You'll see that it does 5 damage total, of which 3 is kinetic and 2 is thermal. If you look at a typical T1 ship, I'm not going to bother linking one right now because I think it'll take too long. But basically, kinetic resistances on shields are 40% for T1 ships, and thermal resistances on shields are 50% for T1 ships. So what all that's really doing is multiplying the 3 kinetic damage by 60%, because that's the unresisted portion, and then it's multiplying the thermal damage by about 50%, because that will be thermal damage is 20% on T1 shield. So you have 1.6 thermal damage, and you've got 1.8. You got 1.8 kinetic and 1.6 thermal. You add those two together, you get 3.4 base shield damage. That's how they came up with that number. It's not a particularly useful number, like I said, because shield resistances and armor resistances will be totally different between different ships. That answer your question?
It does, thank you.
All right, great. Next question.
I know we didn't talk about them too much, but what about the other kinds of ammo, like null and void ammo?
Right, so the Tech 2 ammos are, you can fit Tech 2 ammo in, you can only fit ammo of a particular tech level into guns of that tech level, or higher. So, for example, you can fit T1 ammo in T1 guns or T2 guns, but you can only fit T2 ammo in T2 guns. Basically, the T2 ammo is extreme in some particular characteristic of the ammo. So, for example, let's see. So, if we look at Barrage Ammo, for example, which is the autocannon ammo that's Tech 2. Someone could link Barrage and Hail. Those are the two Tech 2 autocannon ammos. So just like there's specific variants of each turret, there are also specific variants of each Tech 2 ammo. So in other words, there's no difference between projectile T1 ammo for artillery and projectile T1 ammo for autocannons. But there is a difference for projectile T1 ammo, projectile T2 ammo, because T2 ammo can only go in a specific subtype of the projectile weapon. So, for example, if someone could link also the Quake and Tremor ammo for artillery. Thank you very much. So notice that if you look at Barrage S, and you look in the upper left, it'll say Advanced Autocannon Ammo. This only goes in autocannons. And then if you look at Quake, it says Advanced Artillery Ammo. This only goes in artilleries. So the Barrage Ammo, if you compare Barrage to Hail, you'll see that Barrage has a significant tracking speed penalty, but a massive fall-off bonus, so it's great for sniping. And then if you compare the Barrage to Hail, you'll notice that you get a significant range penalty and a significant tracking penalty, but you'll get a dramatically increased damage output. So you can see that you're basically trading off just like you are with the turrets. They're favoring one extreme versus the other. Other questions?
How does accuracy, follow-up, and optimal range affect something like a target painter? I know you have to be in the range to use it, but how does the fall-off really affect that?
So they work more or less like guns do, where if someone could link a target painter, we'll use this specific example, but basically within the optimal range, you have a 100% chance of landing it. Then within the fall-off range plus optimal, it works just like guns, where your chance to hit gradually decreases from 100, then to 50% once you've reached fall-off plus optimal, and then down to 0 once you've reached 2 times the fall-off plus the optimal. So, for example, on the target painter that Laurent linked, the optimal is 25 and the fall-off is 50, which means that between 0 and 25 you get no penalty to hit, and then between 25 and 75, that is 25 plus 50, you get somewhere between 0 and a 50% penalty, and then between 75 and 125 you get somewhere between a 50% and a 100% penalty. And then basically once you're getting out past 75, you're only going to hit about half as much or worse. So that sort of limits the effective range of the target painter that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it really only affects if I guess each activation is successful and not the signature radius bonus. For at least the target painter 1 will always be 25%, no matter if you if you're at 40 kilometers or if you hit them at 70 kilometers, it'll always be 25%.
Correct. Yes. If it hits, it always hits exactly the same way.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Other questions? X up in class.E-UNI or talk and mumble. Go ahead. I don't think I could have possibly covered everything that you wanted to know. So I think it would be very surprising if I did that, so I'm sure you still have questions. It doesn't have to be about gunnery. It can be about anything you want in EVE or otherwise. Anyone at all? Okay, I guess I have done an amazing job of teaching. Should I assume that?
This is tired.
Not helping my ego?
That was a great class. I found it very informative.
Okay, well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Just a reminder to everyone, please go fill out the forum thread so that I can take your feedback and incorporate it. Tell me what you liked about the class, whether you thought I did a good job or not, what you would have liked to see otherwise, et cetera, et cetera. If anyone has any questions that they think of after the class, please go ahead and post them in the forum thread or email me or do whatever you like. I do want to make sure that I answer all of your questions if I can. So thanks, guys. Thanks for coming to the class, and have an excellent time. Fly dangerously. Oh, also, if you're still in the Mumble channel, I will be closing it shortly to indicate that the class is now over. So I'll give people a couple of minutes to move to wherever they want to go, and then I'll close the channel, and you'll all be booted probably to one of the random lounges.
All right, I'm gonna. This is Bory. If I was recording it, I'm going to stop this now, cut it up a little bit, just take out the beginning 5 minutes, and I guess this last little rumble that was after the questions, and then I'll upload it either in the next hour or so, or if not, within the next 24 hours, I'll get it up online for you.
That would be delightful. Thank you so much. I appreciate your help.
Awesome. Great. Thank you.